Oh, she's like,
Morning to everybody joining us. I can see the number of people in the waiting room go down, which tells me folks are popping in here. So, good morning. We are right on the hour right now, and so I'm going to give it till 1 minute after or until I don't see any more waiting room people. Okay. Well, welcome and thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar, our deep dive on right sizing licensing rules. With a focus on regulatory reform around ratios and technology. My name is Megan Irwin. I am a consultant here at Opportunities Exchange. I worked with my colleague Louise Stoney on our paper on this topic we put out earlier this year. I'll be our host today. I am also a former childcare regulator myself, although that was 10 years ago. At some point, I'm going to have to stop claiming cred for that because so much has changed in the field. But this is a topic I deeply care about, have a lot of experience about, and am thrilled that so many folks want to join us to dig in on today. So I'll pause here to give my co-presenters the chance to say hello and introduce themselves, and then we'll dive in. Louise, why don't you go ahead?
hi, I'm Louise Stoney. I'm co-founder of Opportunities Exchange, and I'm a troublemaker from way back, and I've really enjoyed working with Megan on this issue.
Hi, I'm Mary Graham. I'm Executive Director at Children's Village, which is a large nationally accredited childcare center in downtown Philadelphia. And some folks would say I'm a troublemaker for a long time ago, but hopefully good trouble. Thank you.
Yeah, we love
Definitely good trouble. We
Yeah.
make good trouble.
Before we begin, I wanted to give two housekeeping items. One, please stay muted throughout this conversation. We had 200 people register for this webinar, and so if we have even a fraction of that joining, people being off mute will just create audio chaos. The other thing we wanted to let you know is that we'll be covering two topics, and between each, we will pause for discussion and conversation. And so if you have a question that comes up or a comment that you want to put into the discussion, we would like to recommend and ask that you save that and put it in the chat box when we get to that point, because there are simply too many people on the call for us to be able to scroll back to the top of the chat and go down trying to find folks' questions. So hold your thoughts until we get there. Then you can pop them in the chat box and we'll be able to monitor it a lot easier. So that's the housekeeping. Just by way of framing for today's conversation, the first thing that I wanted to share is that as we go through today's topics, we want to emphasize that we are here offering ideas and thoughts based on research that we've done around this topic for ways to challenge the status quo thinking about childcare regulation, to encourage creative thinking. We don't believe that this is something where there's one right way or the examples that we're sharing are the only way. We are sharing examples and thoughts that are new, that challenge the way that things have always been done. And we hope that as you engage more in thinking about regulation in this way, that you will challenge us back, bring your own new innovative ideas to the table, and that we're all just really kind of partnering here to shift childcare regulation to be more friendly to providers, while yes, of course, always protecting the health and safety of children. The other thing I wanted to say by way of framing for today's conversation is that we're walking into this webinar assuming that this is not your first exposure to the idea of regulatory reform or right-sizing childcare regulation, because we want to be able to go a little bit deeper than we've been able to go in the past on ideas about how to shift regulation around ratios and how to use technology in the world of regulation to reduce compliance burdens on providers. So we are hoping that you either attended our conference where we did kind of 101 on this topic, or that you've had the chance to read our issue brief that was sent out as part of the registration for this. If you haven't, obviously you can stay, listen, absorb the ideas, but I do really recommend that you hop onto the website. It's linked here and read the full brief so that you have a deeper and better contextual framing of the topic and the way that we think about it here at OpEx. So we only have up until the hour to get into some really meaty and interesting topics, so we're just going to zoom right into it. The first topic that we wanted to deep dive on today is ratio reform. This is such a hot topic in the field right now, and it's one that feels risky to a lot of people to even discuss because of efforts that are taking place in many states across the country right now to deregulate childcare. And deregulation has often kind of led with proposals that increase group size without much thought behind it, and increase group size in a way that isn't really materially solving any supply problems and is decreasing child safety and probably adding to provider stress. So when we talk about regulation reform at OpEx, we're really trying to shift the narrative. We are not afraid to have this conversation. We're not afraid to talk about how to adjust ratios, how to change the way we think about putting age groups together in classrooms, or really any topic related to regulation. But our framework is really aimed at taking a more strategic approach. So we are not focused on deregulation. We're focused on taking a comprehensive look and review at the rules that govern childcare, health, and safety, and asking what actually needs to be here, what is actually there because it must be there to protect children's health and safety, and what's in our rule sets that's duplicative or can go or is based on outdated ways of thinking or is just there because it's what's always been there. And we're also really thinking a lot how we can streamline the way that we do compliance using technology in ways that actually make a difference for providers' bottom line and ability to run programs, while yes, always focusing on children's health and safety as the most important thing. We also think that the way that ratio reform specifically is being framed right now as a supply boosting strategy is actually kind of a red herring and not a useful way to think about it, not a helpful way to frame it. Because a lot of programs we've learned through our research are actually under-enrolled right now, and it's not because ratios are too low. There's a lot of reasons that a program might be under-enrolled. One reason can be because of rigid rules around age groupings, as we'll learn in a moment, and actually Mary will be sharing some real-life inside of a program thoughts on the way that rigid rules around how we group children by age can actually lead to just not being able to open classrooms. But we don't think that ratios as a supply boosting strategy, that's not the right way to be talking about it. Louise may add more about that. It's a particular love of hers. And actually, we just had a newsletter come out on the topic of childcare supply and real-time supply today. So check that out. It's probably in your inbox. We think that these are the more interesting questions to ask when it comes to thinking about ratio reform. Instead of saying, let's just sort of blanket increase the number of children who can be in a classroom while keeping our rigid and perhaps somewhat arbitrary and perhaps somewhat contradictory, depending on what program you're talking about, age groupings, we're asking these questions. What if there's a way to be more creative and more flexible around ratio? Is there a way to write regulations that give providers flexibility in how they're putting groups of children together in ways that are developmentally appropriate and safe, but less focused on arbitrary kind of age cutoffs? Is there a way to do this that is more thoughtful versus just kind of keeping the same old rigid thought process about what children can be together just with higher caps, which is what blanket deregulation is doing. So we're just trying to be provocative in the questions we're asking, but also thoughtful and mindful of the realities of what goes on inside of a program. Through our research on our paper, we found a couple of really interesting examples we want to share. Louise is going to share those with you now, and then we'll get to hear from Mary about the realities inside of a program.
Hi. So basically, I stumbled across this approach to ratios when I was looking. Have done a lot of work on the issue of microcenters, thinking a lot about small sites that enroll up to 30 children, and who struggle, quite frankly, with staying full and when they have mixed stages of children. And I stumbled across the North Dakota Group 30 approach. So North Dakota has a category of licensing. It's called Group 30, and it applies to any site, whether it's in a residence or commercial setting, that serves up to 30 children. You can apply for a Group 30 license. And when you get a Group 30 license, the ratios are based on a formula. And this is the formula right here, as you see. So if you're under 18 months, the child's under 18 months, the ratio is 0.25, 0.2 for 18 to 36, 0.14 for 36. So you see basically the formula there. And then if you look at here with this example, so let's say we have a small site with 21 children, and these are the mixes of ages they have: 2 babies, 2 toddlers, 6, and yet you see what the formula, applying this formula, that means that they would need to have 3 teachers for those 21 children. And so basically, this is how they work staffing ratios under the Group 30 category. Next slide, Megan. I also discovered that Virginia uses a similar approach in family childcare. So in Virginia, they don't have a separate small family childcare or large. Basically, the family childcare is family childcare up to 12 children. And the number of children that can be served is based on this formula. So each care of 16 points. And then for as you see, for every child under 15, it's 4 points. Oh, somebody says she's not seeing the slides. Is there, Megan, are you? Oh, everyone else can see. Okay, no problem. It's just Tammy. Sorry, to go back. So basically what you see here are the points that are assigned based on the ages of the children, and each caregiver is assigned 16 points. So basically, that's the way that these were 2 examples that we used. Next slide. And I think, oh, no, sorry, I'm going to share my screen. So let me pause for a minute. So basically, I looked at these 2 things and I thought, okay, well, as I'm thinking about microcenters and doing staffing for microcenters, could we think about this formula? So I wanted to sort of go deeper and better understand it. And so I started being the geek that I am. I started playing around with numbers and I created this spreadsheet. Can you guys all see the spreadsheet? Yes? No, I can't hear
They
anybody.
say yes in the chat.
Yes, they can. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so here's
thanks,
what I
Sarah.
did. I pretended that I was in North Dakota, right? And I compared what would happen with a Group 30 license in North Dakota and what would happen if I were licensed as a center. So over here, you see, these are the center ratios in North Dakota, but I've mirrored them here. So if I was a center with 21 children, and these are the mixture of children, babies, toddlers, right? If I applied as a Group 30, I would have to have 3 teachers. And I could structure those children in, of those 3 teachers could be with different groups of children, as we're assuming a mixed age group. If that same center applied under a center license in North Dakota, you see the challenges they would have. They would have to have 4 teachers. Those children would have to be divided up into 4 classrooms. They would actually have vacancies in 3 of those classrooms. So they'd have to struggle with find children of the right age at the right time in the right place, and they'd always be under enrolled. So let's say they grew to 23 children. What would that look? How would that look different? Well, they would still have 3 teachers because the rounding happens after 0.35 in North Dakota, right? And they would have to have 4 children if they were in a center. But again, they would have vacancies. Maybe, and look at this, the 5-year-olds, they would really be a problem here if they would have to like combine those 5-year-olds into with the 4-year-olds, they'd still be over ratio. You begin to see how complicated it is. Here's what happens if they go to 24. So the bottom line is what you need, you begin to see what kind of machinations a program has to go through in order to fit into these categories. And how honestly, the number of teachers, somewhat different, not hugely different, and it gives them the ability to group children in ways that make sense. Now, I was looking at this only for small sites because I was struggling with figuring out how do we actually create rules for microcenters that are going to work in a site that enrolls less than 30 children. We presented this issue at our last conference in Minneapolis, and Mary Graham happened to be in the audience, and she was really excited by this. And I was, quite frankly, very surprised because I thought Mary runs a center. You can switch to the slide about Mary now, Megan. Mary runs a center in Philadelphia that enrolls over 400 children. So I thought, gee, if you have that many children, you probably don't need this kind of flexibility. But in fact, that wasn't Mary immediately started talking about how much this would benefit her. So I'm now going to pass the baton to Mary and let her speak about her experience. So
Hi,
Mary,
everyone.
take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I was at that workshop and I went because ratio and licensing reform is a concern that everybody has. And I worry that it's going to decrease quality. So when I heard Louise's presentation, I was so excited because OpEx is like NACCE and other high quality programs. They don't want to put children in danger. They want to increase quality without increasing less profit or driving more people out of business. So Children's Village is large. We have 425 kids. We're celebrating 50 years. We serve kids 6 weeks to 13 years of age. Majority of our families receive some type of subsidy, whether or not it's Child Care Works, which is the state program, Head Start state funding, Pennsylvania Pre-K, Kansas City, Philly Pre-K, after school programming. And we've been trying to operate as a nonprofit and staying in business for 50 years. And over the years, we've had to come up with lots of creative ways to do that. And I will push the envelope when needed. And this idea is really helpful. And when we said, well, it really wouldn't help you, I'm like, oh, it would really help us. Because over the years, I mean, first of all, Children's Village always had mixed age groups from 1977, meaning we put toddlers together and we put preschoolers together, 3 and 4-year-olds together. And even when we expanded the ages we served, we always had mixed age groups for lots of reasons. 85% of our kids don't speak English. What's a typical 4-year-old? It's very different if you speak English or Chinese. And high quality means individualizing care for children. So mixed age groups can work. So we would also, and it also helps with enrollment. I love doing business trainings for childcare providers, and I keep pushing, don't separate 3-year-olds from 4-year-olds. You have a 3-year-old opening and a 4-year-old the next person on the wait list. Parents don't want their 4-year-old with a 3-year-old. Also, programmatically, kids get to spend 2 years with teaching teams, sometimes 3. Talk about continuity. We all know, best research says it's the relationship with the adult. So why do we move children every year? So by the time they're 5, they've gone through 5 sets of caregivers, teachers. So we've been dealing with that for a long time. But we also, because of our advantage of working with multi-funding systems, we do have regulations, such as you can't have a child under the age of 3 in a pre-K counts program, meaning by the age of 3 by September 1st. So from September 2nd on, I have toddlers who can't be in a preschool room, who should be in a preschool room. And we were challenged with this years and years and years. So what did we do? Well, when we renovated, we made sure all of our spaces could have up to 24 children because that's what the regulations are, 1 to 12 or 1 to 15 in Pennsylvania based on the age of the child. But we have a smaller school age program than infant to preschool. So we took a room that had a capacity of 24, and in September, those children are under the age of 3, September 1st. And because some of them are young toddlers, we meet the ratio of 1 to 5 for NACCE. So I have 2 teachers and 10 children. But over 4 months, those children turn 3. That room then becomes a room of 20 children. I have 10 more children without an additional staff person. And it's not a sudden change. It's kids who have been with the teachers for a year already. It really has helped us keep enrollment. It's helped us keep enrollment both for infants and toddlers and preschool. We do the same thing with school age, with kindergarten. June comes, pre-K programs, Head Start programs end, and children then are still in preschool. They don't want to take naps. They're anxious. They've been with you for 5 years. They're going to another program. And every behavior they had at age 2 comes out worse. So what did we do 3 years ago? We started a rising kindergarten program. The ratio is still 1 to 10, but they do what school age kids do. They are not taking naps every day. They're doing more activities. So it's been helpful for us to keep full enrollment. But this idea that Louise and OpEx came up with would really solve a lot of these issues. Now, I would love to change funding systems too, but I can't, I'll keep pushing back. As I said, I like to make good trouble. Would I like to change a regulation that says a child who's 3, September 3rd can be in a pre-K counselor room? Yeah, I would like that. But until I can, I can't. But I could do it with other funding sources. So I see this as a really innovative way to keep quality, keep full enrollment, keep consistency. I know what happens in programs, and it has nothing to do with whether or not they're large or small. What do? Programs that are not necessarily high quality, when there's too many children in one room, they move the child. Why are we moving kids? This way, you can move teachers. You can move the staff, which is far more important than moving children day to day. And because we know that that's not quality. So I can talk about this for hours. I just wanted to know if Louise or Megan or anybody else had questions. But it is a way to really deal with both the financial system, the enrollment system, and the vacancy rate. I saw the newsletter that just came out from OpEx, and I thought, oh, that's certainly much better way to look at childcare deserts. I just worked with a research for action group. They were looking at out of school time funding in Philadelphia. And they kept looking at enrollments. And I kept saying, you have to look at the vacancy, especially with school age. In Pennsylvania, I don't have a license that says you have 12 infants, 62 toddlers. I have a license capacity, whether or not I want them all infants or toddlers or preschool or school age. So that's how many states work. I don't know all the stuff that OpEx does. I know Pennsylvania well. So I think this is one way to look at it. I think it's really important that we be creative until the systems and licensing rules can get changed. It also addresses legislators' concern about childcare is too expensive. It is expensive. If you have a group of toddlers in Pennsylvania and you have one child who's a young toddler, it changes whether or not you have 12 children or 10 children, which means the cost of care goes up for every family and for every child and for the state.
So you saw me show my spreadsheet. I would encourage those of you who are thinking this, we're proposing this as an idea that we happen to show you the formulas that were used in North Dakota and Virginia. you guys can use whatever formula you choose. The issue, what I would do is pull out an Excel spreadsheet and play around with it. Like, what would a formula look like if you did it this way? How would that compare to what is currently required by our rigid current licensing? So that sort of you're almost doing kind of a gut check. Am I comfortable with this? Does this feel right to me? And then begin to explore what kind of flexibility this would give providers to be able to move children around.
We also know that historically, many high quality programs did start out as mixed family style groups where they had infants to preschoolers in the same room. Now, over the years, with all of the developmental brain science, we realized that perhaps that doesn't work for infants, but it certainly can work with toddlers and preschoolers, and certainly can work with 3 and 4-year-olds, and certainly can work with toddlers in that age group. So I just, for us, and what I said to Louise is we do have the capacity to think outside the box because we have 425 kids and 25 classrooms, and we can move things around. But when you are a smaller center, and smaller centers are going out of business very quickly comparatively to the larger programs. And that doesn't mean you have to be a large program to be operating. I see Nancy's comment about legislators doing this. I'm not saying legislators should change the licensing. What I would like is if each state who is responsible for licensing, which in Pennsylvania is the Office of Health and Human Services, and they're the folks that are changing licensing. And they're being responsive to legislators who are saying, you got to change the ratios. Because we know that that's out there. That's been out there. That's not a new thing. So here's a way that we can control the narrative and still keep quality. If you say, okay, let's look at this. We can increase supply a little bit, decrease cost of percentage. It's not going to shave 50,000, it's not going to shave $5,000 off of the cost of for preschool, but it's going to save some.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Nancy,
Thanks, Mary. Louise, I wanted to check and see if we have questions coming in. So want to hear your thought. And then there was a question that you answered in the chat. I think we should answer it verbally for people that will be watching this because they won't see the chat. But go ahead with your thought. And then the question was, is the Group 30 license with all children and teachers in a single room space? And then the comment from Nancy in the chat about listening to legislators that don't know about what's best for children. Wanted to give you the chance to respond to that as well as Mary Louise.
so let's talk about the Group 30 license. So let me just say the Group 30 license is similar to family child care. I mean, you could Google it and you can pull it up, but it's not, this just happens to be the way they do ratios. But the number of children that you can serve under Group 30 is also based on the square footage, the number of toilets that you have, a few other facility requirements. So it's not 100% this, but yes, the idea is this is a rural state with limited facility capacity, and this licensing category works for them to both protect children and give programs the flexibility to meet mixed age groups. In terms of
And what's your thought on the question or the comment about it makes me nervous that we're listening to legislators that don't know about what's best for children, right? I think in there is a question of if we're opening up a conversation about ratio, are we just being reactive to politics? Or I guess my question to tag on to what Nancy might be putting into the room is, are we being reactive, or is this an opportunity to have a conversation about what can be best for children and providers that's more thoughtful and creative than how we've typically done ratios and group sizes?
Well, and I know Louise has a thought about that, but one thing that I want to point out is I know providers. I've been in the field for a couple decades, and providers who are struggling to stay afloat often will over-enroll a classroom. And, because somebody's going to be absent. Well, the reality of it sometimes is kids aren't absent. And what happens when you say, okay, I have a class of 20 preschoolers, but let me over-enroll by 2. So I think it's not just legislators who are concerned about the cost, but providers, nonprofit and for-profit providers who have to meet budgets are concerned about enrollment. And then there's another question about quality and school age students in mixed age groups. We have school age. We have kids kindergarten to seventh grade. And the ratio of 1 to 12 and 1 to 15 is crazy. I mean, just because they're suddenly in elementary school doesn't mean we can increase the ratio by 50%. So I would look at all of that.
Louise, what are your thoughts on that?
On which question?
The question about it makes me nervous that we're listening to legislators that know nothing about what's best
Yeah.
for children.
Here's my feeling. I don't think the reality is we're not necessarily listening to legislators around what is good policy. It's our job to present legislators with what we think is good policy. If we're hearing that legislators want to put in a bill, let's not, I feel like we just need more opportunities to pose alternatives. If there's lots of discussions about ratios, this is an opportunity to say, okay, here's an alternative way to think about ratios. But
Right.
I certainly agree with your concerns. I want to go back for just a minute to the question somebody posed in the chat. We've heard from group providers that they would also like more flexibility, specifically during transition periods, morning drop off, afternoon. Yes, we see programs moving kids around during those situations. And absolutely, I guess my personal feeling is if we allowed them to have the flexibility that they needed in the first place, would they need to do that? I'm curious, Mary, how you would respond to that question.
Well, we see this a lot in Pennsylvania with the influx with pre-K count slots and locally funded preschool slots. There are some families who are opting out of childcare funding and just using the pre-K funding, but the programs are still operating full day. So we see people talking about aftercare for a 3-year-old. I'm like, with different teachers. And I'm like, well, wait a second. You're having a teacher for a preschooler who's in a Head Start or pre-K counts funded program with certain licensing, certain qualifications, and then suddenly an hour later, the person only needs to have an associate's degree as opposed to a 4-year certified degree. So I see that already as a problem, and I find it really hard. And we don't do that at our program. I understand why programs have to do it, but you can even be creative that way without changing the whole thing.
Someone also asked about data on the impact of the strategy. I can tell you that North Dakota has been doing this for years. And so when I asked for data, they were like, well, we don't really have data. I mean, because we've been doing it for so long. What the licensing coordinator told me when I asked, and it was a couple of years ago, she said, I honestly don't think we'd have any licensed childcare in this state if we didn't do something like this. So she was pretty clear that it was an essential piece of their approach to licensing. But again, I have not seen, I'm not sure they even have quantitative data because this category of care has been around for such a long time.
We have a question for Mary here that says, Mary, could you explain in a little more detail how the classroom with kids turning 3 would work using this model?
Sure. And I would like to combine that with a second question from Dana that says, one thing to consider could be how age grouping shifts impact curriculum and instruction. Montessori obviously has years of experience with mixed age classrooms, and it's a very intentional approach. K-12 schools often switch to mixed age classrooms for convenience, but without a curriculum and instruction philosophy, approach, and professional development, how do you think curriculum and instruction will be impacted? Well, as I said earlier, high quality childcare means individualized education, whether or not children are all the age of 3 or some kids are 2.5 and some of them are 3. How does that affect Children's Village in terms of our curriculum? We're state licensed. We're Keystone Star 4. We have certain curricula to follow. We make sure that it's consistent from birth to school age, and that it's really developmentally appropriate and assessments are accountable to with the systems we're using. So when we're looking at curriculum, we look at that. So to the first question of how do we do the Rising 3 program, this is the 5th year that we've done this. So for the last 4 years, we open classrooms August 24th. We're going to have new kids. I can't put any child who's not going to be 3 by September 1st in a preschool room at all. I have 12 preschool rooms. I have 6 toddler rooms. So what I do is I take of the toddler room, I take the oldest 10, or the 10 who were not necessarily chronologically like going to be 3 by a certain period, but developmentally, we put them in a preschool, in a space with 2 teachers who, and every toddler teacher will tell you this, there is no separate toddler curriculum and preschool curriculum. It's a continuum. So these teachers are teaching to the children's needs and strengths in September when there's 10 of them. And well, we could make it 12 because that's 1 to 6 in Pennsylvania, but we still do 1 to 5 for NACCE. So we have 10 children in that room. As those children turn 3, I have to wait till the 10th child turns 3 before I add more children. I could do that slow. I could do it on a more gradual basis if we had the percentage. So as opposed to saying from September to January 15th, this is the toddler classroom, and January 16th, it's a preschool, I could make it, in fact, a Rising 3 program all year where they start out with a smaller number, and as children get older, they gradually increase the numbers of children. But it doesn't go above what a preschool ratio is in Pennsylvania, which is 1 to 10. So it's helped us with enrollment. It's helped us keep toddlers, families of toddlers with so many preschool programs, they want their children challenged. So, and parents, it shouldn't be necessarily September 1st, because if you go across the state in New Jersey, it's January 1st. So there's so many things that can be affected by this.
Thanks, Mary. I want to pass to Louise to just do some summarizing thoughts to try to catch up with some of the other questions in the chat so that we can move on in our last 20 minutes to the second thing we wanted to chat about today. Louise, lots of questions about is this developmentally appropriate for children? Would this kind of approach to ratio increase burnout or help it? Any kind of summarizing thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I think the last summary thought I would say is do not assume that this means higher ratios. Do the math, create a spreadsheet, play around. We're not saying that we're trying to raise ratios. We're saying that we're trying to give teachers flexibility. And, when you talk about stress and burnout and staff retention, if you have vacancies in classrooms, it means you're not bringing in the revenue you need to raise teacher wages. That increases stress. When you create such rigidity around what happens with children, you're creating more stress. So what we're about is empowering teachers to teach, empowering directors to lead, and giving them some flexibility within the bounds of what's good practice. All right, let's move on to the next topic, and we can all keep debating this.
Yeah, and please, if someone wanted, Mary, sorry.
I just want to add to that. It may sound like I'm just talking about increasing numbers of children in each classroom. We look at enrollment in each classroom. We look at the numbers of children, the characteristics of those children. This doesn't mean every classroom will have the same numbers. There are some rooms where we're under-enrolled intentionally because we have so many children that need additional support. That's our decision. That's the program's decision. But having more flexibility as a program director and input from your teaching staff is important. And if I can pay staff higher wages, which Children's Village has a reputation of paying people fairly high compared to other childcare programs, we've been able to do that with the blended funding, which is another webinar, not blended, braided funding, all of that. So,
Thanks,
Thanks.
Mary. Both of those are such important summarizing points. And Louise, if someone wanted to play with your spreadsheet, could they reach out to you?
Of course, yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So it's not like the Louise's spreadsheet isn't some big secret. It's just a tool she built, and like any and all tools we build at OpEx, we're always happy to share and help people do that kind of math. Um, Moving on to our second concern slash big idea around regulatory reform and right sizing. We are very concerned here at OpEx about the paperwork burden that comes with regulatory compliance for providers. And we know from some of our own internal research that most licensing citations are paperwork based. And we know that not having the right paper and the right folder and the right filing cabinet on day of inspection from a risk management perspective is not the same as having a violation that's a more material threat to health and safety. And yet paperwork focused citations and the paperwork burden does have real costs to providers in terms of lost instructional and free time, less time for PD, opportunity costs and financial costs that can come along with that. It also can, having paperwork citations can impact a provider's ability to get insured, even though these kinds of violations are not the same as more intense health and safety ones. And I am gonna have to unshare and reshare because it's not letting me advance my screen. Sorry for the tech snafu. Let's try again here. But when I get to the right spot here, we're gonna talk about ways to harness technology. So it shouldn't really surprise anyone who's familiar with our work at OpEx over the last decade that we really believe that we can harness the power of technology to document compliance without having to keep binders and binders of paper copies of things like fire drill sheets, attendance records, staff professional development, et cetera, et cetera. And pretty much anything administrative or compliance based that needs to be done in a childcare program that is being done on paper right now can be done, and in many places is being done, using a childcare management software. And again, this webinar is not a 101 level webinar, so I'm going to go over this kind of quickly with a little bit of an assumption that folks that registered for something this wonky have at least a passing familiarity with what childcare management software is. If you want to know more, if you need to know more, we have a ton of content on this topic on our website. We are obsessed with the power of CCMS here at OpEx. These are software systems that can manage the whole of a childcare business. You can see the types of functions that a CCMS can manage here on the screen. And we are increasingly confident that these systems can be used by both providers and state regulatory agencies to monitor compliance for things like, again, health records, staff records, attendance, fire drills, et cetera. And we are increasingly confident about that because we're working with states that are doing it. So many states have started to see the value of technology and are deploying tech solutions like the ones here in the blue on the left side of the screen, which is a great start. It's a step into the world of using technology. It's a step toward tech. We're always asking the question, like, how much further could you take it? And do things like simply having a provider portal or automating licensing and existing forms, does that make the provider even easier harnessing the power of technology? So we recommend, and we're working with a couple states to do this, pushing things a step further and identifying how to use CCMS, a provider-centered technology, for compliance-based purposes. In Kentucky and Colorado, where they have a critical mass of childcare providers using CCMS systems, they've begun to test out giving licensing staff limited time-based access to CCMS files for compliance review with provider permission. The state that I'm the most familiar with that's doing this is Kentucky. They have been piloting, again, it's opt-in for providers, um, giving licensing inspectors back-end access to a CCMS for a time limited amount of time to go in and do compliance checks. And they started out just focusing on compliance checks for employee credentials. So, it can sound sort of scary, give access, back-end access, but they're doing it with a group of opted-in providers focused on one piece of compliance, testing out this idea, seeing what they learn about how much easier it makes things, and going from there. In Iowa and Oregon, we've engaged and work with the state agencies there to crosswalk all of the functions that a CCMS can do with all of their state licensing requirements, to see how to really use CCMS for licensing compliance. So this has meant taking licensing rules for all types of licenses and crosswalking it with the functionality of the CCMS. The goal is to understand where there's overlap and to figure out ways to use the CCMS to streamline inspection and document verification. So, for example, licensing rules require a lot of information in the child file, things like immunization records, basic info, emergency contacts, etc. CCMS platforms already ask for and keep all of that information. So why wouldn't we just see if we can create a way that licensing inspectors can use what's in the CCMS versus having to have a provider keep it online and have printed out copies in a folder. There's so much more to say about this. We're a little bit short on time, but our colleague Joanna Borden is on this call with us, and she has really been the thought leader on this and the doer of the work in Iowa, especially around these crosswalks, and has just unlocked so much potential for the use of childcare management software to comply with licensing regulations. And so, Joanna, I want to invite you to just share any reflections that you might have on what this has unlocked. I have the slide about Iowa up here. You don't have to feel pressure to speak to it specifically, but just want you to share a bit about what this has unlocked for the licensing agency in Iowa in terms of their ability to be more streamlined in compliance monitoring.
Absolutely. Thank you. So some of the work that we've done in Iowa was really looking at an opportunity that they had around what we call a licensing binder. And that was a professional development session that was offered to programs around how to maintain regulatory compliance with paper copies of documentation within a binder. As we all know, that's how it's been done for so many years, and that's what most people are comfortable with. But we looked at that and realized that there's an ability to take that and use CCMS functionality to really help programs see that they're not only collecting some of this information already and or how to collect it in a CCMS if they're not. And so we're working through this binder and creating these one-pagers that would support programs in using a CCMS to meet regulatory requirements. The second part to that is having a how-to as well for licensing staff to be able to review all the information that programs are putting in there. We're still working through this and we're engaging all stakeholders, right? We want to ensure that regulatory staff see the binder, see these one-pagers, understand how programs are going to collect that information. We're receiving feedback from coaches. This could be a tool for coaches to really support programs in meeting those regulatory requirements through a CCMS, and even thinking through possibly engaging programs themselves so they can look at this binder and give us feedback before we disseminate it to the greater group. So that's some of the work that we've been doing, and we're finding that about 80 to 85% of the functionality that is needed to document licensing information in a CCMS is already there. And we're working with alongside vendors to make sure that if it's not there, what can we do? Can we request additional functionality? Can we look at other ways to collect this information in a childcare management system? So it's really opening up such a great opportunity to again, I think Megan said it, we're obsessed with using childcare management systems to really collect the data that programs have to do, and collect every day. So we're always finding additional methods, additional ways to utilize what programs have to report on. So just a quick summary of what we've been doing in Iowa.
Thanks, Joanna. And the link is here on the slide, and you'll get these slides afterwards. But Joanna's created a sample crosswalk if there is any state that wants to just see what it looks like to put their licensing requirements up next to the functionality of the CCMS systems that are used in your state. She's created a tool that gets that started for you, and it's pretty user friendly, and it's available on the website. We really think that this figuring out how to leverage childcare management software for compliance really does start with that crosswalk. You have to know where there's alignment and where there's not. And there are, of course, other considerations. The crosswalk is a good exercise, and then there's lots of questions that get opened up after that. For example, rules might need to be revised. They might not, but depending on your state context, you might need to revise your rules to explicitly allow for CCMS-based record keeping versus requiring that piece of paper. But gosh, if you could do that, what a change it would be for many, many providers. Of course, providers need to buy in. They need to have access to a CCMS. More and more providers across the country and in a lot of states are getting that access, are buying into this idea, either through like state agencies creating incentives to do that or just on their own. But we never want to gloss over the need for providers to be opted in, to have access, to know how to use the technology, and that they may need support around that at the beginning. By that same token, regulatory staff also need to have buy-in, and they need to have access to the electronic documents, and they also might need training to become comfortable doing compliance in a more technology-focused way. We're all just really used to doing stuff on paper, and changing how we're used to doing things is hard, even if there's a payoff at the end. So we don't want to gloss over that. Of course, there's some change management pieces here. Want to challenge you to just think about what other change management issues you could foresee happening. We won't have time for a robust discussion on that today, but it's just really worth thinking about. However, I will say I've participated in the work to create a couple of these crosswalks in different places, and it really is a fascinating exercise. It really shows you where rules are repeating themselves over and over or not making very much sense, and it is revealing of some low-hanging fruit around not only where you could streamline documentation, but where you may be able to streamline what your rules say overall. We have about 7 minutes left. I want to give Louise the chance to chime in with any thoughts here. And then so many questions, the chat was popping off around technology. While Louise shares her thoughts, I'll try to find one question that we might be able to answer in the time we have.
So somebody was asking for the link. I think what they're looking for, and I did just put it in chat. It's the link for the licensing crosswalk. And so I did actually just put that in the chat. But it's also on the PowerPoint, which we will send to everyone who came to this presentation.
Yeah.
Actually, is Tammy Foley on the call? And if so, I wonder if Tammy, if you might be willing to mute and answer. There was a question from somebody about how you fund this kind of licensing reform work. And I know you've been doing a lot of it in Iowa, and I'm just curious if you want to talk a little bit about how you've been able to do that in Iowa. Is Tammy here?
Yes, I am here. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm not in a good spot for talking, but we'll try it. Originally we funded CCMS licenses, business coaching, and some of the other work we're doing with, the stimulus dollars, American Rescue Funds, and that type of funding. It is now 100% funded under CDF funding. That we're continuing to fund full licenses for CCMS licenses with 2 vendors that we're utilizing in our state. And providers must participate in business coaching in order to get that free CCMS license. The business coaching can be up to a year. Some providers want to continue, but we link a lot of other pieces with that. And now starting to do coaching for professional development credit on some business topics too.
Thanks, Tammy. That's great. I know some states have also used PDG money to support some of this work. So there's definitely different ways that they can fund it.
Yeah, it looks like I was scrolling through the chat and it looks like the questions were getting asked and answered as they were going. Lots of questions about how do you pay for this? Where's the links to these things, etc. So glad that got answered in the chat. I wanted to just see if Louise or Mary, if you have any kind of summarizing thoughts you want to offer on this piece. Again, we're not saying you have to do this, but if you can find a way to make the life of your regulatory staff and your providers easier and streamline this slice of compliance, I think it's just such a huge win without really having to even go through a rule rewrite, unless you're in a state where you would have to explicitly say that it can be electronic and doesn't have to be paper. And I don't know everybody's rules, so you may have to do that. But this piece just feels like such low-hanging fruit to us. We love talking about it. So if you want to talk about it more with me or Louise or Joanna or any member of our team, you can reach out and let us know. But Louise or Mary, anything you'd want to say to finalize or summarize?
I think basically our feeling is that childcare management software can and should be a provider's home base. It's like their fog cabinet in the sky where they're keeping everything. And more with data bridges, states can simply pull or push or pull data to and from childcare management software, which basically not only helps providers save time, it helps them stay organized. So we just think it's a huge opportunity. I think the other thing I would say is that when we've worked with states on this kind of work, what we often find is that the states are requiring specific forms rather than saying, wait a minute, what is the data that's underneath that form? If that data lives in a CCMS, can I just verify that the provider has it? And so a lot of times what's happening is providers are filling out forms rather than actually demonstrating compliance, which they could easily. So there's a whole change management process that we work through with a lot of the states that we work with around, let's talk about what it is you need to know. And how can you verify what you need to know without this particular form having to be filled out? Because think about how much time we're all taking filling out this particular piece of paper, which may or may not be necessary.
But even with that, Louise, even the ancient, and I say ancient because it's 25 years old, CCMS system that Children's Village has been using, but we are converting. We could format the forms to what the state wanted. So we still have the data. So the state says, and DHS, hey, licensing monitors want things organized. We have it so organized. Here's the papers. Here's the information. Here's what you need. We mirror the forms. We can add the information. DHS, at least in Pennsylvania, doesn't care if it's the same form as long as the same information's in the form. We often add information. How is this helping us? It's not just helping us stay organized, but one of the things that we're going to be doing very soon, Joanna, as Joanna's been working with us, is having real-time attendance. Listen, teachers always call us when we're out of ratio. They rarely call us when they have 3 teachers and 10 children. Hey, you know what? And other rooms, because they want the break, but other rooms, need help. So there's a way to do this. It's not a, one size fits all. And I like that. I always like that OpEx doesn't say one CCMS system over another. You need to figure out what you need and providers need. It is all different. There's no one perfect system, but there can be systems that are a whole lot better. And I bet licensing people on here who might be in that part of the field, they want their staff to be more efficient. They don't want them going through files that are so disorganized.
I also want to speak to the issue about about the issue that was raised about Spanish-speaking providers. 100%. The reality is we can deploy CCMS in ways that are very respectful and supportive of other languages. We do it all the time. I don't know, Joanna, if you want to add anything to this, but the CCMS vendors have been working closely with us around a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I would just add that the vendors have heard that and are working towards a lot of support with translation, the ability to
Well, I picked up dirt yesterday and then it rained, so now I have.
Oops. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't talking over someone. But yeah, the ability to have a system that works for them as well, because it is important. So I will say they're always deploying, even professional development trainings for staff that are English is not their native language. So yeah, more to come with them, and I do think that they're going to continue to push for that.
Well, that may be a really good topic for us to deep dive on in the future. It comes up all the time. It's super, super important. The technology gap shouldn't be a reason not to make regulation make more sense. But we'll have to come back to that in the future. We'll have to leave it here for now because we're at the hour. Really appreciate everyone joining. Hopefully it's given food for thought, whether it's been exciting or challenging, or somewhere in between. We're just excited. So many people want to think about regulation reform. Really, really wonky topic. So let us know what you thought. We're always happy to hear from you. And thanks so much for joining. We will send out a recording and the slides. Everything's linked on our website. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.